Good morning, Patrick Peace here. I want to jump right in and start my review of Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. This first video is going to cover chapters 1 and 2. His first chapter is basically an introduction of how great his theory is going to be. He says his purpose is to examine the biology of selfishness and altruism. But really, he speaks earlier than that, and he says that he wants to use the novelty of language and metaphor to popularize his neo-Darwinism. And he says he wrote it in a fever of excitement. Dawkins tips his hand. He says what he's going to do. He says he's going to use the novelty of language and metaphor. See, he's so well educated, and he figures he has such a grasp on the English language that he's going to be able to do tricks with it. And that's really what this is. It's the presentation of a language magician. He makes takes a bunch of words and moves them around, and he casts this little spell with his words, and while you're not looking, Shazam, he's got his version of evolution. And his book really only starts in chapter 2. The first chapter, he sets up Charles Darwin as his god, right? So he says that if intelligent life from another planet came and visited Earth, the first question they would ask is, have they discovered evolution yet? No, that's not the question they would ask. They would ask, have they discovered God yet? Now, this book really begins in chapter 2, where he starts by saying, in the beginning. So right away, he takes a dig at the Bible. And what this book is an argument against the Bible. It's an argument against Jesus. That's what the book is. He goes on and on about how he was so in a dilemma over the title, The Selfish Gene, and he should have called it The Immortal Gene. So let's start at chapter 2. What do we got? He says, in the beginning was simplicity. This is his replacement. So in the beginning was simplicity. And his argument goes like this. Let me just, I have notes here, but I don't really need to refer to my notes for what I'd like to say on this chapter. He says, you started off with a primordial soup. And he keeps saying, it must have happened this way. It must have happened like this. It must have happened like that. 3 times at least I've read it in chapter 2 alone. It must have happened like this. You start with a primordial soup. And then his argument is that everything likes stability. He admits to the Big Bang, so he admits there's a Big Bang. Then he says everything wants to have some stability. Goes against the law of thermodynamics, about entropy and all that. He just says, like, for example, a soap bubble likes to make a perfect shape because it's stable at that shape or something, whatever, right? Doesn't talk about when it bursts, but and he says molecules formed and they must have become stable. And then some of these molecules must have become able to replicate. And he calls it the remarkable molecule, the jackpot. So his argument says, we're not used to thinking in terms of millions and millions of years. So if you played the lottery for millions and millions of years, you'd eventually win the jackpot a number of times, is his argument. Fair enough. So he says that there was this remarkable molecule that came out of the primordial soup, and it had an affinity for its own kind, he calls it. You see how he uses these words as a magician uses his props? So he said, had to have an affinity for its own kind. He just made it up. He's just making it up to try and replace the Bible. In the beginning was simplicity. His first 2 sentences of the chapter sounds like something either Rowan Atkinson would write or the Monty Python guys. In the beginning was simplicity. It is difficult enough explaining how even a simple universe began. So for him, it'd be kind of difficult to explain a simple universe, but because we're dealing with a complex universe, it's going to take a little bit more effort on his side. Like suddenly, he keeps saying the word suddenly, 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 suddenly. He uses the word suddenly, and that's like it's a reference to the hand of a magician, and he just waves his hand, and it's suddenly, from the primordial soup, suddenly these molecules wanted to have an affinity for themselves. And some were able to replicate themselves over a long period of time, and some would have replicated themselves to last over a short period of time. It had to happen like this. It must have happened like that. This is his sleight of hand that he's using. Then he brings up the Gospels in page 16. He takes great delight. And what a segue. I mean, he's in the middle of his grand theory, and then he says, well, there must have been mistakes when these molecules had to replicate themselves because there's mistakes in the Bible. See, how long does it take him to get out and attack the Bible? What does genes and genetics and zoological theories have to do with the Bible? Well, he makes it have something to do with it because that's what his premise is. He's trying to replace the Bible. He's trying to attack the Bible, right? That's obvious. It comes out immediately. He talks about the scripture about Jesus being born of a virgin. The word actually means a young maiden, or it actually comes up and he goes, into the Greek. It's something. That's in the footnote. Okay, so the first footnote that he presents, is it the first or the second? Oh, it's about everything before 1859 is worth nothing. So the first footnote says, anything, he quotes a guy who said that anything before 1859 wasn't of any interest because that's when Darwin came along, right? Oh, and he does immediately put down anybody with any religious answers. Oh, I'm familiar with them, so save your stamp, he says. Don't give me any religious stamp, he calls it. You bring up religion from the get-go, and then you say, but don't talk to me about religion. Oh, let me talk here about, let me try and make fun of the Bible by replacing the first quote of it. Let me immediately segue into something about Jesus, but don't talk to me about religious stuff. Oh, because I don't need any of that. Oh yeah, the Hebrew word for young, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Oh, nice quote, straight out of the Bible. You brought the Bible into your book. I'm not bringing the Bible into your book. You brought it in there. Fecundity, evolutionary trends towards higher fecundity. It must have wanted to replicate itself more. He's talking about what came out of the primordial soup. Big Bang, primordial soup, and then lightning would make maybe some proteins and amino acids to coalesce, and then you had a molecule. And then that molecule just wanted to have stability somehow, and then eventually it would start replicating, and then it would just, it must have just started replicating, and the replicators becomes molecules, and then the molecules become genes. And this is what we are. We're robots carrying along these genes to support them. Must have discovered automatically, simultaneously. He uses words like automatically and simultaneously. And then the process had to be cumulative and progressive. It had to just keep going and going because that's what evolution is. And now he's doing a neo-Darwinism. He's presenting evolution for the masses, the audience that he had in his mind when he prepared it. And he confesses to this, the audience that he had in his mind, the layperson, as well as the expert and the wannabe expert. You have no argument. There is no argument. You've got a little bit of wordplay. That's all. Right? Waving your hand around and then it had to happen that way. That's not an argument. That's somebody being so arrogant that they can propose a theory. Why? Because they said it so. Simply because he's got all these credentials, and because he says it, that's his argument. Because he said it, it had to be that way. That's what you got so far in the first two chapters. Now we're moving on to chapter 3, Immortal Coils. That'll be for my next video. Thanks for watching. Take care now. Bye-bye. God bless you. I love you. Even Richard Dawkins, I'm supposed to love my enemies. I'm sure you're a nice guy, and I'm sure you've helped a lot of people in your life, but your book is making me want to throw up.